panel today is CEO Talk, Africa at the Table, Shaping a New Future. So when we're talking about shaping a new future, we need to assess our current reality and what that means going forward for our potential journey and growth. I'd like to welcome my panel, Jerome Anik, CEO of Orange Middle East and Africa. Please welcome our panelists, Kuseni Dlamini, Chairman, Aspen Pharmacare and Alexander Forbes Group Holdings, South Africa. Paul Russo, Group CEO of KCB Group, PLC. And Francis Gatare, CEO of Rwanda Development Board. Welcome to everyone. Take a seat. Right, so we're aiming to have a very interactive conversation, and we want all of you to get involved as well. We will be opening the floor to questions before we end. So please jot down your thoughts and hopefully some of the tough questions that perhaps I've omitted. But are you ready for the session, gentlemen? It's not going to be easy. All right, so I'm going to start with, you know, I was thinking about this conversation and this topic. You know, we're talking about the future. When I think about my future, and I'm sure a lot of you do this in the room as well, we think about our current reality and what goals we need to achieve, and the targets and our ambitions, and what's going to take us to that place where we want to reach. We know we want a stronger African continent, stronger economies, we want education, we want to industrialize, we want good healthcare, and we want everyone to have the opportunity to really prosper. So my first question is, how do you assess our current reality? Jerome, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Eleni. Good afternoon, everyone. If we take the situation of the telecom industry and beyond that, the digitization of a continent, I think we can say that good progress have been made regarding the internet access. Now that you know that 70% of the African population have access to a 3G network, 90%, 70% a 4G network, 90% a 3G network. But the paradox is that, and we call it the usage gap, is that despite the fact that most of the people are covered now by a mobile network, there are still 500 million inhabitants which are unconnected. So this is the kind of paradox that we have to deal with as an industry, and it's instrumental for the digital revolution of a continent, which is going on. And for that we need, of course, infrastructure, but we need as well affordable devices. We need affordable prices for the people to access the internet, and it deals as well with the global environment, with taxes that operators have to deal with.
We need a lot of things. Kuseni, welcome, coming all the way from South Africa. You do not have a microphone. Do we only have 3? Are we sharing?
Thank you.
All right, we're going to share our resources.
Thank you. Just to mention a few things that are key in terms of looking at where we are. I think we are in a very strong position as a continent when we look at our demographics, largely very youthful, and that's an asset that we can use for global competitive advantage. We need to be deliberate and strategic in investing in the quality and quantity of our human capital. Secondly, the issue of decarbonization is center stage in global geoeconomics and geopolitics. Africa has got the largest endowment in terms of critical minerals. We need to be strategic in terms of how we use our critical minerals to be a catalyst for industrialization in Africa. And we need to be strategic in terms of also making sure we don't just focus on digging the rocks and exporting the stuff out of the continent, but create high value adding industries to produce high quality products for the export market so that we can have economies that are export led and world class in terms of servicing the needs of the world as a whole. I think Africa is really in a very, very strong position. There are challenges here and there, but I think we've got a lot going for the continent to enable us to be a global powerhouse, to be a first world continent, as I think we can and must within a generation if we choose to do the right things.
Within a generation, if we choose to do the right things. By the way, a lot of the things you mentioned, we've been discussing for over a decade, at least I have, so let's see if we can get it done. Hopefully we find solutions. Paul, over to you, sir.
Now, I would say, and Elena, there is no doubt that we've talked about Africa's potential. It's been written.
Yeah.
And I think every nation in Africa brings in on the table a different competence, a different value, and different opportunities. I would say, for example, KCB operates in 7 markets. Last year was very difficult for KCB in Kenya, or banks in Kenya in general. But the results that we've posted were actually good because the rest of the markets were doing extremely well, which tells you that because of the diversity of the nations, you've got opportunity to manage your risks a lot better. We haven't done that very well. However, whether we like it or not, and we need to have these hard conversations, leadership and governance must step up. Both the private sector and public sector. Because if we want to move beyond can to what President Kagame said do, then private sector leadership must enhance leadership and must enhance governance. And I think many times when we talk about governance and why we are not progressing, we think about public sector and politicians. I'm from the private sector, and I'm saying private sector must get governance and leadership right for us to get to the next level.
Because that's what is on the mind of private sector,
Yep.
clearly. Thank you so much. Brilliant stuff, Paul. Francis, may I say I'm very happy to be back in Rwanda. I always have the best time. I think a lot of people feel the same.
Welcome
You guys
back.
are doing incredible things, but again, how do you assess where we are right now, our current reality, and what that means for our journey and our future?
Where we are at today in Africa, unfortunately, is still at the potential stage, because everything you look at points to the immense potential that exists, but it also points to the obstacles in place that are preventing these opportunities from providing the dividends that they should. Take, for example, the Africa Intercontinental Free Trade. If you look at the statistics of cross-border trading in Africa, the formal statistics will tell you that we are under 20%, right? But there is a lot of informal trade that is going on cross-border organically. And this points to something. It points to the fact that there are clusters of production and markets for products. It points to the fact that movement of people and goods is a natural phenomenon that should be allowed. But the obstacle is always going to be government policies, to my colleagues saying governance. If you look at the movement of people on the continent, it continues to be the hardest. Fortunately, there are some examples that are beginning to emerge on our continent, where, typical example here in Rwanda, where all African passport holders can just show up without a visa. Kenya recently announced the same thing. I think there is about 10 countries now in Africa that are embracing this notion of free movement of people. Now, we need to move to the free movement of goods and remove the barriers, even in areas where we have regional integration, regional economic communities. Implementing the agreements sometimes is very difficult. People find reasons to make it not work than to make it work.
No, it's brilliant, and I'm glad you mentioned the movement of people, and you kind of, going ahead, fast-forwarding some of the topics, but I think we need to focus on this. The movement of people really hard. A couple of weeks ago, I actually went to Nigeria, and I spent time with Aliko Dangote and at his refinery, and he was talking about the difficulty that he has to travel across the continent, to do business, to embark. I mean, if he can't travel, none of us can. I mean, it's really difficult. So, what is it going to take? And I know that Rwanda is really easing things up. You've got a 72-hour e-visa now from a Kenyan perspective. South Africa, let's not even talk about how difficult it is for Nigerians to get a visa to come in. I mean, we've got problems in SA. Even Rwanda has issues. I know you're not government, but I'm just saying, a blanket statement. But just on the free movement of goods, can you really figure out a solution on the free movement of goods and an easy movement of goods when we are seeing trucks that are just sitting in traffic at border posts across the continent? You can't get that done without the infrastructure. Maybe the policy can help you get, goods from one border post to the next, but you need that infrastructure to make that happen. Francis? It's
Partly infrastructure, but it's more governance than infrastructure. Because the reason that there are bottlenecks and choke points at border points, is the notion that people are bringing in illegal things, or they are crossing the border without proper permits, or that they are criminals who are coming to do harm to some countries. And evidence shows that places which have actually opened up are not the places that are most prone to criminal acts. In fact, criminals will always find a way to cross borders. They will not be passing through the formal border points. And so I think we are getting it wrong. Infrastructure is part of the problem, but it's not the biggest problem. I think governance and harmonizing policies that govern the movement of people and goods is always going to be the key thing.
Just to come in and just build on Francis' point on the issue of governance, for me, that's a low-hanging fruit, because it takes the political will and commitment by political leaders to make the right decisions and be able to come with regulations that make it efficient for ports to clear goods and people moving through. I've been in retail for over 10 years across the continent, and one of the challenges has been clearing customs.
Yeah, with Massmart, right?
Yeah, with Massmart, Walmart subsidiary on the continent. It's really become an issue that's a constraint to trade.
Has it become easier since the African Continental Free Trade Area came into effect?
I wish I would say so.
No.
It's not yet clear. It's not self-evident that it's become easier. But I think a forum like this has got to make the voice very loud and clear that it has to be made very easier. And the issue of infrastructure, we can't chart a new future for Africa without having an efficient and world-class infrastructure. For me, that's an excellent area of opportunity for capital to be allocated to resolve
Jerome,
that.
you wanted to jump in?
Yes, no, if I may add on that, there is physical infrastructure, of course, roads and so on for physical goods, but there are digital infrastructure as well, which are key for the development of the continent. We are talking about, of course, domestic networks, but as well international networks. Submarine cables, for instance, is still an issue for high-speed internet in the continent. We are investing a lot as a telecom industry. Orange alone has invested in more than 4 cables over the past 10 years, but we need more, and we need more to build the digital speedways of tomorrow that the continent will need.
But you would be able to help with easing up on what's happening at border posts from a technology perspective. Is that correct?
Yes, I think.
And are you engaging?
Not directly. What we consider is that the digitization of a trade, and there is a lot to do to avoid the bottlenecks that the countries, people, and businesses are suffering from on a physical side by using the digital technology as a workaround, let's say.
Okay, Paul, yes.
Ellen, I think when we are in this platform, we have to be bold. I think in many instances, you have examples where infrastructure is not the problem, technology is not the problem. And I can give you examples of a number of border points, right? Where governments have invested in technology and infrastructure. But you cannot be running trade and business from the mood of whoever that is in power by the day, right? You load your cargo, say, let's be practical. You load your cargo in Zambia, financed by the bank, it's going to go through Tanzania en route to Kenya, maybe heading even to Ethiopia. But by the time you get to Tanzania, Tanzania has changed their policy in the process. You've got cargo that is sitting there. It has nothing to do with technology and infrastructure. If there is no predictability in the way some of these things are run from a policy, and that's why I argue that countries must be run like corporates. You don't just smoke something and wake up and announce something when somebody is on the way, right, to do something. Sorry, I'm a CEO, but I'm also a businessman in the whole country. So you got to have predictability. You have to have predictability. For us to have meaningful trade, intra-Africa trade, we have to run countries like corporates.
So, I mean, and this is a really good point. We've got CEOs in the audience. This is a CEO forum. And when we're talking about, you know, increasing intra-Africa trade, we're talking about people investing in businesses across the continent. And if they can't export to neighboring countries, then you've got an issue. So when we're assessing our current reality, Paul, it doesn't look good. What you're describing right now means that we have so much to do. And you're saying it's coming down to leadership and governance. But where do we stand with that? Are you feeling hopeful?
I do. And I think there is advocacy, there is conversation. We saw this morning from the president himself You've had President Ruto talk about that. We've had Samia in Tanzania speak about it. But I think private sector must be active. It's, in a way, let's take a step back. Naturally, the people that push activism many times are activists. And the corporate world sometimes sits and is clean. Doesn't want to get into that space. You gotta be able to get into that space and challenge and influence, right, in the right way. And I think that is what I really like about the agenda in this forum, which was about leadership, not just being at the table, but influencing to make that transition meaningful and sustainable.
Yeah, I think one of the important issues, if we are to chart a new future in Africa and for Africa, which we cannot ignore, is the issue of efficient institutions. That is the best and cheapest insurance against unpredictability and the rule by strong men or strong women. And I think we have to be deliberate and intentional in investing in building resilient and very strong institutions. Countries that succeed globally without fail have got very strong institutions. They don't rely on the whims and wishes and moods of individuals. And that's where we need to position our continent if we are to be a winning continent.
Francis.
Yeah. I want to speak for a moment in defense of the government. Customs revenues continue to be one of the highest tax revenues for many African countries. And I think many times, the concern for loss of revenue is the consideration that goes into the constraints that make intra-Africa trade difficult. Second is also protecting the domestic market. We still run, after all, our countries as independent nations that we must provide jobs to, and we are accountable to the population, and we are not allowed to send our population next door to take up jobs there. And so we still see a configuration of nation state at the central economy. I think the advocacy will need to be broader, that embraces new forms of revenue sources for public treasury, that also provides opportunities for people to take up jobs across borders, that allows value chain operations for goods and services across regions, not just within the country, so that we can begin to see in reality that we can actually have a regional economy that is integrated. But to the extent that we still run nation states and national economies, that's where the constraints continue to be. Even when countries make a gesture unanimously, there is a cost. There is a direct cost to countries that take up leadership.
Yeah, brilliant points. And I want to take a step back here, because one of the things I'm very passionate about is, of course, creating value chains on the continent. It's something I cover on my show on CNN, my show called Connecting Africa. We're trying to show how the continent should be connected. And one of the huge realizations, and of course, something that has been overshadowing potential growth on the continent, is we keep exporting our raw materials, our natural resources, and we don't have manufacturing capacity, which, by the way, could be a big silver bullet in assisting in creating jobs and just making everything a lot better. But I keep asking myself this question: does the world really want us to fully industrialize and take our value chains back and have full production processing capacity on the continent? Is there resistance? And by the way, it's so expensive to do so. It means that we need patient capital, and it means that we need to take risks ourselves to make that happen. Who wants to tackle this? Jerome, I see you smiling, nodding.
No, I think it's a key question, and the industrialization of a continent is still going on, and there is still a lot to do, of course, on fixing the basics, going for full transformation of products. And here again, I think digitization can help a lot. When I see, and you were talking about the wealth of the youth for the continent, it's 50% of over 1.4 billion inhabitants in the continent, and there are lots of entrepreneurs which are dealing with this challenge. They want to address the issue of industrialization of the continent using digital, AI as well, as part of the solution. And when I think on agriculture, for instance, the transformation can be done with the help of digital solutions. Lots of startups are using it now.
Which will help us leapfrog, right? But
Yes,
we still
yes,
have to do
good idea.
industrialization 1.0. Kuseni, you've worked with Walmart, you've worked with international companies. Do you believe that multinationals and, you know, the global world wants to actually see Africa industrialize? Is there nervousness in taking value chains here?
It's not a question of whether the world wants us to industrialize. We must want to.
You know why I'm asking this? Because I know we want to, but if we are sabotaged on the process and path to it, that creates constraints. We need to have full control. We can't keep signing bad contracts, and we are signing bad contracts.
No, absolutely. I mean, part of the pushback will be to make sure that we have got the skills and expertise to sign good contracts. And secondly, to make sure that we are proactive in formulating our own industrialization strategies. If you look at Asia, you look at Europe, you look at North America, the industrialization of those regions was driven internally. Africa's industrialization is not going to come from outside. We shouldn't wait for others to help us industrialize. We should take charge, we should take the responsibility to drive and propel our own industrialization and our own growth. And we've got what it takes in terms of human capital, in terms of natural resources, in terms of land when it comes to agribusiness. And you can name anything, Africa has got it. And if anything, COVID taught us that we're very vulnerable and very fragile when it comes to, for it to take healthcare. Our healthcare systems were very exposed. We couldn't have enough PPE. We couldn't have enough vaccines for our own people. I mean, only 1% of vaccines that are used in Africa are produced in Africa. And the company that I'm chairman of, Aspen, happens to be the only producer of vaccines of any significance on the continent. So there is massive potential in every sector, whether it's telecoms, whether it's financial services, whether it's mining. We must have global African champions in each and every sector that can take their own position in the Fortune 100 of this world, Fortune 500, FTSE 100, because we can do it. Look at China, you look at India, you look at South Korea. These are countries that share similar history with us, and they've managed to do it. Japan is a good example.
But we need money to do that. So this is where the banker comes in.
Yeah, and I will argue that it's not a shortage of money, but it's a shortage of bankable
ideas. Is it a shortage of money? Bankable, by the way, the bankable project, I just want to ask you a question before you answer that, because I want you to answer this specific question. The cost of capital, and we were talking about this in the speaker's room before we came on stage. The cost of borrowing is insane, whether it's in Kenya, whether you look at Nigeria, South Africa's kind of okay, Rwanda's in mid-teens. It is expensive for startups to come and ask the bank for money. Cost of capital is expensive. It's expensive for sovereign nations. Credit ratings are not great. So if we want to do this, I mean, it is a lot more expensive to do business in Africa than anywhere in the world. So Kuseni Dlamini's amazing sort of vision, fantastic, but we need cheap capital to do it. And it's not there.
And I guess, and this is the problem when you're a CEO and then you get in this panel, you have to say it as it is, right? Because
how much money do you have for us?
I think that, let me just come back to the earlier question, and I agree with the panelist. However, if you want to set up a plant, where will the equipment come from?
Where would the?
Equipment.
Oh, okay. I can give you analogies of what Aliko Dangote had to do with this refinery. He had to bring everything in.
Right?
It was insane
so
what he had to do.
Yes, and that's the point, because they've got that level of control. So we might say we're in charge and we have the resources and we can do what we need to do, but they have a level of control. You're going to get those equipments from the other side, the pricing and what you pay, you're going to pay in dollars.
And who's going to be the EPC?
Not in Kenya shillings, and then you have all those contracts about how.
Yeah.
And they said to you, by the way, if we are going to fund, and it's slightly cheaper than local funding, but you must buy the equipment from us, and therefore the price is at a higher level. I hope you get where I'm heading to. So there are other levels of control that make you struggle to be able to invest. And I don't run businesses like chairman, but certainly there are levels. They do have an upper hand on levels of control. I think I think President Ruto has been on the platform challenging the financing structure, being not really favorable to Africa and asking for better terms. You and I were discussing why manufacturing is struggling in many of the countries. The funding structure that we have, short-term funding at rates of 18, 20%, 5 years, 10 years is not going to work. right? If you reach out on the other front, it's got to have to be, opportunities for cheaper, patient capital that is being able to deploy it within Africa. And I think one of the speakers didn't talk about in the morning, right? There's quite a lot of cash in Africa that is sitting elsewhere, right? I think that needs to come.
How do you bring it back?
You've got to create the right setups and environments for
Exactly.
it to come through, right? You've got to have the right incentives, Elena, to be able to do that. And therefore, and goes back again at the same point of leadership and governance. We've got to be able to run countries as corporates.
So, I want to take us back to the topic, right? We're shaping our future in this panel, and we're talking about some of the things that we need to happen, need to see. So based on what we're saying right now, because I want to open the floor to questions, by the way, and see if people want to get involved in this. Francis, I want you to jump in here. If you had to look, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how would you define what the continent would look like? And I guess you're using Rwanda as a starting point for you, because you guys do have a long-term plan. But are we still going to be sort of relying on our commodities to send, to get exported? Are we still going to be a net importer of food? How would you define the next 20 years? Because based on the history of the last 20 years, it's not very encouraging in terms of the momentum in changing these important metrics.
So when one looks ahead and can have the luxury to imagine what it will look like, you want to see an African market that is fully integrated. Maybe it's not realistic to have Rwandan market integrated with a faraway market like Mauritania. But at least within our region, we need to see a continent that is regionally integrated with an economy that is functioning as one, where raw materials can move from one region, be processed in another, in combination with other existing components, so that you have an economy where there is a value chain, a supply chain, a movement of goods and services and people that have common policies that govern the way business is done, so that across the entire region, there are no barriers, both formal and informal. I can imagine a continent where a person wakes up and wants to go visit a relative or go to for a conference, a business conference anywhere, without having to visit their embassy first. I can imagine where goods are moving across the continent at affordable cost, perhaps bulky goods moving on rail and not in trucks, and where airlines are interconnecting Africa without ever having to go to any other region outside Africa to come back to Africa.
Is that the 20-year plan, vision, ambition?
Actually, that's possible.
That's
even
wild.
within 10 years, this is possible.
10 years?
Because we said governance, right? Because this is all political, right?
It's all political.
It's all political. And leaders ought to have political courage to allow this to happen. Because, yes, businesses can have leverage on leaders and you can advocate. But until leaders begin to see that this is beneficial to them and take courage to implement them, it will not happen.
Okay, so I just have to say this. Earlier this week, I went to the new international airport, by the way, Francis, to see what's going on. Do you guys know that Rwanda is building a new international airport?
Yes, I know.
Audience? Yes, no, maybe, hands
Everybody
up,
knows.
down, nobody. Do you guys know? It is amazing. It's this vast land, earthworks going. You've got, actually, there's some runways that have been laid, and I love going at sort of the start of things because it's showing the reality.
Because we are dreaming. Look, the current airport has 2 million passengers capacity per year.
Yeah.
We are dreaming and building an airport that has an 8 million per year capacity. And we believe, yeah, we believe that this will be a hub that is going to revolutionize what we are talking about, reconnecting Africa.
Let me tell you, you know what I love doing when I go on stories like this? I take so many selfies on spots to show the earthworks, and then years later when it's done, I show that same spot. So I look forward to actually coming online.
Elena, on that,
Jump in, but I want the audience to answer
on
some
that
questions.
airport, I think it's important to just mention that it's actually funded by local banks, and
Yeah.
it's one of those models that Rwanda took to seek syndication of facilities from
But is
local
Kenya
and
not
regional
feeling the
banks.
competition?
At the end of the day, we need, when we say governance, and I like what Francis has said, you got to open this up. And we run a bank here, BPR, and I can see the chairman right in front here. We want Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, every country to succeed. KCB was a leading, or now BPR was a leading mandate arranger for that facility.
Great. Okay. Jerome, you've been quiet. You know what? The one thing that everybody has on the continent is some kind of mobile phone. It might be analog, you know. I mean, those last forever, right? The ones that are just
Yes.
the easy ones. But actually, that's the way we can connect people. And you know, Francis mentioned this: the informal sector, formalizing the formal sector, the informal sector. How we do that, and you guys might hold the key. How are you thinking about this?
Well, I think the role of the telecom industry is threefold. First one is about infrastructure, and as we said, there is still a lot to do in connecting the unconnected people, thanks to deploying our network coverage. Rural coverage is the next frontier for us. That's the first one. The second one is digital services, and what we said about the youth population of the continent is these young people are keen on using local content, local developed applications, and we are as well leveraging on that, putting new super apps on the continent, such as Maxit from Orange. And the third one is about digital inclusion, and I think that's our role as an industry, not only to promote our infrastructure and our services for the business, but as well to play an instrumental role in providing the digital skills, helping the young population to access to digital skills. That's what we try to do, other players as well, and we have an action which is called Orange Digital Centers that we deploy in all our 18 countries of presence. And this is key because, you know, people estimate that by 2030, 230 million jobs, and we are talking about employment, which is a key issue for the continent, will require digital skills. So we have to train young people in how to use, how to develop, how to code, how to use AI, cybersecurity, cloud, and the data infrastructure, and the fact that the sovereignty of the data will be key as well for the continent is something we have to address.
And you know, it's brilliant what you mentioned, because we mustn't forget that the underlying infrastructure that we need is actually the digital infrastructure, because for Francis to build, you know, an international airport that is efficient, he needs you, right? For KCB, he needs you to have, you know, a strong digital platform, and you need to plug into this, because we're building new infrastructure without the legacy problems, I guess, that the rest of the world has experienced.
Definitely, I think digital is an enabler for everything else, for every sector. Digital and payment, and I think if we look at the optimistic way of it, there is a leapfrog in people using smartphones, accessing to the internet, developing new services with startups, and there is still a huge opportunity to continue to leapfrog and to go very fast on that, thanks to the digital infrastructure, connectivity, and payment as well. Something which is quite unique on the continent is the mobile payments. That's something which doesn't exist in Europe, for instance. And here, most of the African inhabitants are using a mobile wallet to pay. And when you have connectivity and payment, then lots of sectors can benefit from it to leverage on that.
Brilliant. Okay, who's in the audience that'd like to ask a question? I'm looking for a woman, because how do we talk about shaping the new future without a woman involved? Okay. All right, we've got 2 men, it's fine. But please, the woman, we need your voice, because we need to shape the future with you involved as well. Please, sir. Hi.
Hello, my name is Philippe Miquel. I work for CFAO. I'm heading the infrastructure branch of CFAO. Sorry for not being a woman.
We forgive you.
Thanks. I'll try to be as little provocative as possible, but I've worked on the continent For the last 10 years, I go to conferences, and for the last 10 years, I hear the fact that we need to build value chain, that we need to build manufacturing industry, but we're missing the point, basically. We will only build value chain and build manufacturing industries once we've understood that it's not a financing issue, it's not a political issue, it's not an issue of leadership, it's an issue of market. Why does the manufacturing industry of China has been so successful? It's essentially because they started building their industry to serve their people. Once they have done that, they went abroad to disseminate what they learned from their market. Same thing in Korea. Why has Rwanda has been so successful in many ways in attracting private investors or international investors is because their primary target is their own market. Why is Jérôme so successful in his, or Jérôme's firm so successful in his business? It's because he's trying to serve the African people. Okay. And so until we understand that building value chain means serving the African people, we will not succeed in building. And one last point, many African countries are leaders in producing rubber. How many young African people have the capability to buy the $300 or $400 sneakers that are flooding the industry? Very little. So until we serve the African people, shaping the future will not go through building value chain.
That is a brilliant point. I think we're all on the same page that we want to create value chains to support African economies and support our own economies, to stop importing food, to start serving ourselves first and foremost. And I'll let you answer that question. I just want to take as many as possible, and then we can take them all together. Sir, in the background.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Allo. I work with Choice International Group. I'm the group head of legal for Africa. Okay, so I was going to respond to something that was said there about integration. And Mr. Francis did say something about political will. I think at this point, there's a role for private sector in getting things done. And if I should take something from what the last speaker said about market, Africa alone, isolated into tiny little countries, is not a compelling market, but integrated and united becomes a very compelling market. I think the private sector should exert their weight. They have the financial muscle. They have some of these politicians, they sponsor them, and get this thing working. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Oh, a couple. Okay. I think I see a woman. Is that a woman? All the men. Thank you. To the woman first, please. Thank you so much. Thank you. Round of applause. Do you agree that we can't shape our future without the woman at the table? It's absolutely important. Our previous session said that the best performing loans are the loans from women. Women don't default, right? Paul? They default less. You said we don't default at all. Here we go. Hello, ma'am.
Merci. Je vais parler en français.
Thank you very much. I will speak in French.
C'est possible, hein?
It's possible. Thank you very much. My name is Sise Aissatu, CEO of Shape Entreprise in Ivory Coast. I work in a transportation company where we as women, actually entrepreneurs, we are very happy to be part of the national champions. But we need to understand exactly this phenomenon of national champions and see whether there is no political will in Axama exactly to help the national enterprises.
How can we foster national champions in the different countries, and how governments can support this idea of national champions?
Fantastic. Okay, let's try and tackle these questions. Who would we start with? Jerome, do you want to start with you?
Well, maybe by this one, and by the way, I think women will be instrumental in the digital transformation of the continent. We are more than happy to have lots of leaders and managers in our local companies in the local orange, and I see Aminata Ndiaye here, who are managing our operations, and I can tell you, I don't know about the default rate in the banks, but about the management performance, for sure, there is a difference. So thank you for that, and it's the same for startups. We see lots of women entrepreneurs very successful in our Orange digital centers, and that's something which is really, really, really great. About the national champions, I think lots of companies in the telecommunication industry, and if you look at Sonatel in West Africa, it's a kind of regional champions. And before building, let's say, continental champions, I think national and regional champions can be role model. There are several companies like Sonatel, which are a very good example of local and regional champions.
Fantastic. Kuseni.
The issue of national champions is very important. It requires deliberate policies by government and a willingness by the private sector to collaborate. Airbus is a great example of a regional champion in Europe between the French and the Germans. And in Africa, we also need to look beyond national champions to regional or sub-regional champions. We don't have a culture of the private sector collaborating and partnering and joint venturing across borders and across countries. That's something, as we chart a new future, that we need to think about. Felipe raised the issue of the market. I think that I agree with you. And I think the fact that currently, as we had earlier on, 20% of the world's population is African. 2050, it will be 25%. We have the market. We have to prepare for it, and we have to industrialize. We have to re-energize our manufacturing sector so that we do not rely on imported goods. We also had a very troubling statistic earlier that we actually spent $100 billion per year importing food into Africa. And we've got arable land, we've got favorable climatic conditions. Only 1.5% of our land is under irrigation, compared to 15% in Asia. I mean, these are problems that can be fixed, and we've got what it takes. We just need to make the right decisions, take the right decisions, and invest the right capital to be able to fix those problems.
Paul.
Which one do you want me to address? No, I think the
what
question...
stands out for you on the question front?
Sorry?
What stands out for you, all the questions we had?
No, I think the point is the private sector must play a bigger role. He has a point. Absolutely. We can't be standby. And I think in many instances for private sector, we accuse them, as long as we are making profits, we are comfortable. And I think we need to go to a point of saying, you got to push for reduced margins, but sustainable, entities and countries in future, because you are enabling a bigger market access. So I actually agree with the person that spoke about private sector, both at individual level, but also from associations levels, right? If I was to speak about banking, in each country there's a banking association that plays the advocacy role. Some of us are members of that. But we also have to bring our expertise and challenge to the leadership. I think we've seen, I sit in the National Investment Council in Kenya, and therefore have access to be able to push certain agendas within that team for private sector. So there are opportunities for us to step up.
Francis.
Yes, the three questions are actually linked. One, the first question was about the strategy for producing for a domestic market. It questions one about what do you define as a domestic market, because none of our individual national markets are large enough to be competitive by global standards. And so we need to step out of the national boundaries to define domestic market as regional, as continental. Then we can begin to have champions that are truly competitive. Regional champions, not just national champions, that are connected with value chains across the continent. Then you can begin to reduce costs, then you can begin to increase quality, then you can begin to scale up and compete globally, right? But that to happen goes to my brother from Choice, I think that's the name of the company. To do that, we need to have the borders opening up. We need to have harmonized business policies. We need to have relationships and movement of goods and services that don't have formal and informal barriers. And indeed, that is the role of private sector, because many people in political positions will always want to defend their domestic definition as a constituency.
All right, I see our time is up, which I'm confused about. I thought we had a panel until 1:30. Just confirming with the organizers, I'm continuing for a few minutes longer. I'm not asking for permission. Because I just want to, there's something we haven't spoken about, and I kept this for last. I want to ask the audience right now, how many of you are worried about climate change? Hands up. How many of you think, or you can also put up your hands or not, none of you are worried about climate change? All of you, okay, great. Mine too. How many of you believe that climate change is going to impact our ability to fully industrialize? Okay, great. Really interesting. And this is the thing, I think the world, there's major hypocrisy about Africa industrializing as well. Well, you can't industrialize because that means, you know, greenhouse gas emissions from Africa are going to increase dramatically, even though we barely, you know, add to what we're seeing on the global front, and we're not to blame for the current situation, but we are at the receiving end. Francis, you know, you guys are doing incredible things. I tried to bring a plastic bag into Rwanda, and I was stopped and almost arrested at the airport. Not arrested, but I had to buy a fabric bag. But tell me how you guys are thinking about climate change and industrialization.
By the way, the banning of non-biodegradable disposable plastics as a policy had been going on for more than 10 years now in Rwanda. So it's not a recent thing. It's not a fad that we are picking up because of the global concerns about climate change and environment. And the reason is that we saw it as our own domestic concern, not necessarily as a global concern, because we could see the impact of these flying plastic bags around our environment.
I'm not in trouble. We have until 1:30. Thank you, sir.
So I think for some policies like these, we have to take it personal and do it locally, and take initiatives that are local, which hopefully will add up to an aggregated global concern. So this is how we do it in Rwanda. We don't wait to see how someone else is going to do it.
Fantastic. And then, Paul, I want you to jump in here from a financing perspective. How are you guys looking at financing companies that have a big, you know, footprint, carbon footprints? Are you guys taking things into consideration when you're looking at the climate agenda? And is that part of what you're doing right now as a bank?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So the latest borrowing by Safaricom is actually a green loan. And they have certain matrices that they have to meet for us to continue, and it's a syndicated facilities with local banks, for us to continue to keep that low interest rates. So the whole facility has targets for them, for us to keep that rate. It can be structured, it has been done, and we need to be able to do that. And I'm just using the Safaricom facility as an example here. However, I think at the end of the day, Elena, as I was saying, if government is in the same streets borrowing and is trying to sweep all the liquidity from the market, it just becomes extremely difficult for you to make a choice to lend to somebody at 23%.
Because that's what you're lending at right now.
That's the reality today. If government is going to be around and crowding private sector and all these other parties, it's going to be tough. So there has to be, in a way, a real conversation about fundamentals and how government funds its own operations. I know many people don't like this. Many governments have to put in their own austerity measures on expenditures in place, self-induced, not IMF.
Well, now that you mentioned the topic, it will be remiss of me to not talk about the tax regime in Kenya, and that's very unpopular. Yeah. And I wonder what kind of impact that's happening on banks right now and how you're weighing that up, because you need revenue collection. This is the reality. I mean, African countries a lot are dealing with debt, and they're trying to find new sources of revenue.
Absolutely. So I really doubt if anyone challenges why you need to tax, because you need to collect revenues both for funding operations as well as pay debt. And Kenya is a highly educated and very vocal population. I think the question is how you communicate and demonstrate use of those funds. That's my personal opinion.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Kuseni, I want to talk about climate change, and I want to talk about the contradiction, I think, in the phrase industrialization and the climate agenda in one sentence, right? I come from a coal mining town in South Africa. I know how important coal is to energy, electricity production in South Africa, when we have electricity in South Africa, sometimes. Often enough, it's okay. But, you know, how much are you taking in this into consideration? Was the priority here just industrialization, creating value chains?
For us, it's a reset on how we industrialize. We want to industrialize in a way that reduces our carbon footprint. We want to drive green industrialization. It's part and parcel of our strategies. And there's a risk that climate change can be a cliche, can be a tick-box exercise. For us, it is not. It's something that we integrate into our business philosophy. It's part and parcel of our corporate culture. And from a board point of view, we believe in setting the right tone from the top and allocating the requisite resources to help our businesses to decarbonize. And we've set specific net zero targets for each one of the businesses that I'm involved in. The issue of a just energy transition looms large when you talk about coal mining towns, such as we have in Mpumalanga in South Africa and other parts of the continent, obviously. So that's something that the whole world will have to partner with Africa in to make sure that people are not left behind, they're not left destitute as we decarbonize and as we transition towards a green economy.
I mean, and that's a really good point, but you know, you need a base load for electricity. We have a lot of fossil fuels. We have a lot of countries that have just found, you know, gas. I mean, it's a conundrum, right? It's like, how do you do it in the greenest possible way, but also eradicate energy poverty on the continent, which is one of the most important priorities. Jerome.
Yes, sure. I think that's something we address very seriously, both on the climate change, and Orange took a strong commitment of being net zero carbon by 2040. And for that, what we have to do in Africa is to solarize, to use the most affordable and popular energy, which is the sun, that is very abundant.
What are you using for your operation?
So we solarize every way we can. When we can build a solar plant, we do. When we cannot, we solarize directly the antennas, the mobile sites. We solarize the data centers on the rooftops. So solar energy is a very affordable and the energy we can use on an easy way. The key issue for that is the regulation. The number of issues we are facing in so many countries in Africa to get the authorization to build a solar plant, when at the same time what you said is that 60% of the population in sub-Saharan countries don't access to a reliable source of energy is a kind of paradox. It is due to political and economic considerations in most of the country, but that's something we have to change to be able to take our part in fighting the climate change.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Again, I'd like for you to get into the conversation by way of voting. Do you think in the next 10 years, the continent is going to be prodding along like we have in the past decade without real change, like the ones that we've discussed here in terms of ambition? Do you think in the next 10 years, we will just be carrying on at the same pace and rate? Show of hands. Do you think that we're going to create momentum in changing our reality and shaping our future? Hands up or down? Great. Well, that's very optimistic. Did you expect that? Yeah? All right, we're going to end the conversation now. I think last words of wisdom from all of you, and sort of what the priorities are, and perhaps what you think the most important things are that the private sector would need right now to make these incredible ambitions happen. Do you want to start, Jerome?
Yes, well, I think we have to be optimistic, and then when we look at all the potential that remains in the continent, we should be optimistic. And the speed of the leapfrog and the digital transformation is really a key enabler for that. So I'm very, very optimistic. What we need is a predictable regulation, less taxes, and a support to the private sector.
Fantastic.
I think as we chart a new future for Africa, we need to change the narrative on a global scale on Africa. Normally, what you read in Western media is negative, except for Elena's program.
I was about to jump
Marketplace
in.
Africa, which is helping to change the narrative and push it towards a positive direction. So I think we have to be deliberate about that, intentional in doing that, and we need to cast our eyes in 5 to 10 years' time. What sort of headlines do we want to see in the Washington Post or the New York Times or Le Monde? I dream for a headline that will say President Biden has been flown to Kigali Hospital for an operation that can only be done by doctors in Kigali.
I think it deserves a round of applause.
I also dream of a headline that says Prince Charles's sons and daughters have enrolled at the University of Nairobi because it's the best university in terms of science, technology, and mathematics. And that's the kind of future that I hope for Africa as we go forward. And also, lastly, we cannot overemphasize the importance of talent. I think talent is the fuel for any globally competitive company and globally competitive country. We need to invest hugely and massively in our young people so that they have got the skills and the knowledge and the expertise to be part of the digitalizing economy, to be part of the global knowledge economy, to be producers of knowledge, not consumers of knowledge. And we need to make sure we are not spectators in the industrial revolutions of our time. As we have been in the past, we need to be key players, proactive players, be creators of products and solutions that the rest of the world would like to consume.
Paul, do you have anything to add to that list of ambition?
Yeah, I'll say one thing. In whatever we do in Africa, we have to create jobs. Yeah. I think if we can go to Timbuktu or wherever, if we don't resolve the problem of creation of jobs and meaningful jobs, it's a time bomb. And you know, industrialization, as we push everything around that, Elena, I advocate that we have to keep top of mind of creation of jobs. Where does the Gen Alpha go to, right? If the rate of growth of population in Africa is what it is, and given our own geopolitical issues, given the nature of stratification in politics in each of those countries, I can tell you, that's the #1 risk for any business and anything that we want to do. Lack of jobs will be a ticking time bomb.
And this is why value chains are important, because there are multiplier effects, ancillary businesses that are attached to that.
Absolutely. So focus on that and end-to-end to make sure that those people are meaningfully engaged.
Francis.
I think we need to go back to the basics and ask ourselves, what is it that we have in abundance better than others? We have abundance of land. We need to focus on agriculture, productivity, adding value to what we can produce, first of all, but also ensuring that our population have got food security. We've got abundance of natural resources, which are essential today in the energy transition. We need to focus on that and add value to it, create regional value chains that actually allows our natural resources to be produced, processed, and transformed into useful materials within our region. We need to focus on our youth and give them the kind of capacities, education, technology, mentorship, so that they can actually contribute to transforming these resources they have been endowed with. We cannot assume to jump to the 4th industrial revolution and the technologies of the 4th industrial revolution without noticing that we have missed out on the previous 3 industrial revolutions, that we still have legacy opportunities that are not yet fully utilized. That's the basics we need to step back towards, and not just dream about an imaginary future. Thank you.
Brilliant. This is such a brilliant point. You know, what I try and do constantly is really advocate that the perceptions of risk towards the continent are unwarranted, and they vastly are. You know, people want bankable projects, but they want double-digit returns. They have high expectations of what you know, they want when it comes to doing business on the continent, but they just want to take and make money. And I think that the power is in the private sector hands. It's in your hands. It's in the leadership hands to start dictating the rules of engagement. And I cannot stress that enough. I can do my job and ask the questions and try and be a voice of positivity, but it was so illuminating sitting with all of you here and the optimism, not only on the stage, but also in the room about our future. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to all of you, Francis Katare, Paul Russo, Kuseni Dlamini, as well as Jerome Enik. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Thank you.